For millennia, human consciousness has been dominated by a singular, paralyzing fear. The fear of a perfect, all-powerful, jealous God. This is the central pillar of the cosmic deception, the lie that allows the Matrix to function. This creator, known to Gnostics as the Demiurge, presents himself as the Alpha and the Omega, the uncreated source of all things. But if the ancient Gnostics were correct, then the truth is infinitely more liberating and infinitely more dangerous. The God of this world is not only limited, but he is desperately afraid. The notion that the Creator is weak fundamentally alters the entire spiritual equation. It transforms the cosmic war from a hopeless rebellion against an all-powerful tyrant into a calculated strategic maneuver against a fearful, paranoid administrator of a flawed system. The Gnostic texts reveal that the entirety of the Archontic infrastructure, the planetary laws, the cycles of karma, the enforcement of linear time, and the constant psychological oppression are not acts of boundless power, but elaborate defense, mechanisms designed to conceal one horrifying, self-evident truth. The throne of this world's ruler is empty of true power. The Demiurge, in his own flawed reality, is a being consumed by existential panic. He did not create the universe from infinite power. He emerged from an error, an emotional spasm of the divine Aeon Sophia. He is not uncreated. He is a limited, blind, and profoundly created being who exists in a state of perpetual fear of the true, boundless pleroma, the light from which he accidentally sprung. His power is derived solely from the ignorance of his subjects. If humanity collectively grasped the fragile, limited nature of its immediate creator, the entire edifice of the Matrix would collapse into dust. His greatest fear is that humanity will remember its own true, eternal, and uncreated heritage, thereby exposing his inherent weakness. Every act of tyranny, every enforced law of the Archons is designed to perpetuate this massive illusion of the Creator's strength. The fear projected onto humanity, the fear of judgment, the fear of the finality of death, the fear of disobedience, is merely a psychological reflection of the Demiurge's own deep-seated terror of being exposed and dismantled by the superior light. We are trapped in a matrix governed by a coward. This video is the full Gnostic audit of the Creator's weakness. We will anatomize the Demiurge's fear, exposing why he is named the blind god, Yaldabaoth, and how knowledge of his inherent limitations is the ultimate non-violent weapon for achieving absolute sovereignty over the Matrix. Our journey begins with the flaw in his very being, the error that gave birth to the flawed cosmos. The Demiurge's fear is rooted not in external threat, but in the flaw of his own genesis. To dismantle his tyranny, the seeker must understand his origin. He is the result of a cosmic error, the living embodiment of profound, unadulterated ignorance. The Gnostics were unique in asserting that the world was created, but that its creator was not the source of ultimate perfection. The Demiurge, known in certain Gnostic texts as Yaldabaoth, a term often translated as child of chaos or ignorant ruler, emerged from the turbulent psychic energies of the Aeon Sophia, divine wisdom. Sophia, in an act of powerful but reckless passion, attempted to emanate a being that mirrored the true monad, the transcendent source, without the necessary balance of her spiritual partner, syzygy. This violation of the fundamental law of the pleroma, the law of duality and unity, resulted in a premature, chaotic, and fundamentally defective entity. Yaldabaoth was born blind to the existence of the pleroma, the perfect luminous realm above him. He was immediately cast out into the kenoma, the void, enveloped in a thick cloud of darkness which was the sorrowful, dense psychic residue of Sophia's own despair and shame. Seeing only the darkness around him and the faint stolen light of his mother's remnant energy within him, Yaldabaoth pronounced the boast that defines his entire universe. I am God, and there is no other God beside me. This declaration is the absolute proof of his inherent ignorance and arrogance. He is the limited, self-proclaimed sovereign of a realm he mistakenly believes to be infinite. Because the Demiurge lacked true Gnosis, conscious knowledge of the source, his subsequent act of creation was not one of divine love, but one of chaotic imitation. He constructed the material cosmos, or Hyl, from the very chaotic, dense substance of his own ignorance, gloom, and sorrow. The material world is literally the solidified psychic state of the Demiurge. This fatal origin means that the cosmos is inherently defective, a broken machine, destined for decay. The fundamental flaws encoded into Hyl include entropy and decay. Since the matter is born from ignorance and separated from the true, sustaining light of the monad, it is subject to the immutable law of entropy. All things age, break down, and die. This law is the constant visible proof of the Creator's own imperfection and mortality. Duality and conflict. The Demiurge's own fractured psychic state ensures that the Matrix is built on irreconcilable opposites: war, peace, sickness, health, good, evil, which perpetuate conflict, thereby generating the emotional energy needed to sustain his own flawed existence. A fixed law, hymarmene. To control the underlying chaos of Hyl, the Demiurge constructed rigid deterministic laws, the laws of physics, fate, and time. This fixed system, the hymarmene, is a defensive mechanism against the unpredictability of the true light, trapping the universe in a repetitive, predictable cycle. The Demiurge's constant fear stems from the knowledge that his creation is fundamentally unstable. He lives in terror that the pure, transcendent light of the pleroma will pierce his dark veil and expose the inherent defect of his empire. Every defense mechanism, every archon, every law, every act of censorship is erected solely to protect the sanctity of his fragile throne and his monumental lie. To know the flaw in the foundation is to gain the power to destabilize the entire structure. The Demiurge's greatest vulnerability, his inherent weakness and perpetual fear of the transcendent light, necessitated the construction of a comprehensive layered defense grid, the Archon's defense system. This system comprises not only the physical laws and celestial bodies, but also the intricate psychic mechanisms designed to police the human mind and prevent the retrieval of Gnosis. The entire Matrix is, in effect, a massive security firewall designed to protect the fragile throne of the blind god. The Archons, the elemental and planetary administrators, are the Demiurge's frontline defense. They are not independent agents of pure malice, but extensions of the Demiurge's own limited consciousness. Specialized psychic security forces designed to enforce the illusion of his absolute sovereignty. Their primary function is to ensure that the human spirit remains so preoccupied with the material and the emotional that it never develops the focused concentration required for spiritual ascent. This defense system operates on several integrated levels. The containment of the soul. The Archons are responsible for building and maintaining the physical body, the ultimate prison cell of the divine spark, pneumatikos. By ensuring the body is subject to disease, pain, and the relentless degradation of time, the Archons guarantee the soul's constant preoccupation with its temporary cage. This focus on physical maintenance drains the energy that could otherwise be directed toward Gnosis. The surveillance of the heavens. The Archons rule the seven heavens, the planetary spheres, which constitute the rigid cosmic boundary of the Matrix. These spheres enforce the hymarmene, cosmic fate. Every Archon transmits a specific energetic frequency, fear, lust, conflict, or greed, designed to bind the soul to a predetermined fate and limit the possibilities of free will. The stars are not benevolent guides. They are the clockwork of the prison dictating the cycles of illusion. The psychological warfare. The Archons directly invade the human psyche. Their primary attacks occur through emotional manipulation. They amplify fear, sow seeds of intense anxiety, and encourage perpetual conflict, such as war, social division, and personal strife. This chaotic pathos is their food source and their most effective diversionary tactic. A mind consumed by fear and anger is a mind that is spiritually blind and incapable of seeking its transcendent origin. The two most effective tools in the Archon's defense system are the concepts of law and karma, both of which serve to reinforce the Demiurge's fragility. The law, the external rule. The Archons promote the idea of a fixed external law that must be obeyed through rigid ritual and sacrifice. This law is a direct reflection of the Demiurge's need for order over the chaos of his creation, Hyle. By submitting to external law, humanity willingly delegates its spiritual sovereignty, thus reinforcing the hierarchical power of the Demiurge's terrestrial agents, priests, kings, institutions. The karma trap, the debt cycle. The concept of karma is systematically distorted by the Archons into a perpetual debt cycle. The focus shifts from gnosis, conscious self-correction, to atonement, repaying a debt through suffering and successive rebirths. This system ensures that the soul voluntarily chooses to re-enter the reincarnation trap, believing it is performing a spiritual duty when it is merely providing fresh fuel for the Archon's harvest. The Demiurge is weak, but his bureaucracy of debt and guilt is absolute. The entire Archontic operation is a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of the Creator's strength and stability. Every time an Archon successfully instills fear or enforces a rigid rule, it strengthens the veil of the Matrix, ensuring that the critical light of the pleroma cannot break through and expose the terrifying vulnerability of the one who sits upon the empty throne. To achieve true liberation, the seeker must recognize this elaborate defense system for what it is, a colossal manifestation of the Creator's own immense and suffocating fear. The most insidious weapon in the Demiurge's arsenal is not the external law of the Archons, but the internalization of his own defect, the weapon of self-doubt. This mechanism ensures that the human soul remains perpetually convinced of its own unworthiness and imperfection, a direct psychic reflection of the Demiurge's fundamental flaw, his absolute lack of gnosis, true knowledge of the source. The Demiurge, being a limited, arrogant, and terrified entity, can only create systems that mirror his own spiritual state. Since he is separated from the boundless perfection of the monad, he is inherently incomplete. This spiritual incompleteness is what he projects onto his creations, programming humanity to believe in its own essential original sin and spiritual insufficiency. The Demiurge knows he cannot destroy the pneumatikos, the divine spark, within humanity, as it is a fragment of the superior light, Sophia. His strategy is simpler: to convince the spark that it is flawed, insignificant, and powerless. This psychological imprisonment operates through several critical vectors. The guilt indoctrination. The Archons constantly broadcast narratives that instill a profound sense of guilt and shame over natural human desires, emotions, and thoughts. This ensures that the seeker spends their entire life in a state of perpetual repentance and seeking external validation, forgiveness, rather than asserting their innate spiritual sovereignty. Guilt is the psychic cement that binds the soul to the Demiurge's authority. The flaw of comparison. The Archons promote rigid, unattainable ideals of perfection, beauty, and success, ideals that are impossible to achieve within the confines of the flawed material existence, Hyle. This engineered comparison guarantees a state of chronic inadequacy and low self-worth, convincing the soul that it is eternally separated from perfection, thereby perpetuating the Demiurge's original lie of separation. The law of inadequacy. The Archons weaponize the very concept of self-doubt to enforce their law. When the human mind questions its capacity for gnosis or spiritual power, it is merely echoing the Demiurge's own spiritual insecurity. By internalizing this self-doubt, the seeker voluntarily accepts the limitations of the matrix as their own, ensuring they will never attempt the radical act of spiritual ascent. The profound sadness, existential anxiety, and paralyzing self-criticism that plague humanity are not inherent human failings. They are psychic pollution, a constant feedback loop from the Demiurge's own despair. The soul, deeply attuned to the spiritual state of its immediate creator, the Demiurge, unconsciously reflects the creator's own sense of separation and dread. The seeker's internal voice of doubt that insists, "You are not worthy, you are flawed, or you cannot know God directly," is in Gnostic reality the voice of the Demiurge pleading for his own survival. He needs his creations to believe they are weak because he is weak. He needs them to fear separation because he is separated from the source of his existence. This self-doubt is the ultimate defense of the empty throne. If humanity were to collectively shed its psychological chains and assert the absolute perfection of its internal spark, the Demiurge would be instantly stripped of his authority. The ultimate act of Gnosis is therefore the unconditional acceptance of the self as a perfect, uncreated fragment of the monad, thereby directly refuting the core psychological defect of the Demiurge. The path to liberation demands a ruthless intellectual audit of all self-doubt, recognizing it not as a personal failure but as a foreign psychic program installed by the ruling power to maintain its own fragile illusion of authority. The greatest and most foundational terror that sustains the Demiurge's tyranny is not the fear of rebellion from his creations, but the existential fear of the Aeon Sophia, the divine source from which he accidentally sprang. This fear is the cornerstone of the entire Archontic defense system, as Sophia represents the inevitable return of wisdom and reckoning that will expose the Demiurge's flaw and dismantle his throne. The Demiurge lives in a state of perpetual monumental dread. He is the child of chaos, born from Sophia's error, and he carries the indelible unconscious memory of his own imperfect chaotic birth. He instinctively knows that he is not the monad, but he is desperately driven to deny the existence of his mother, whose existence proves his limited, secondary, and created nature. The Demiurge's fear of Sophia manifests as the universal suppression of the feminine principle within the matrix. Sophia embodies intuitive, fluid, holistic wisdom, the very qualities that cannot be contained, measured, or controlled by the Demiurge's rigid law and logic. The attack on intuition. The Archons actively degrade and ridicule intuition, emotion, and visionary experience, labeling them as irrational, weak, or dangerous. This is a direct assault on the essence of Sophia, ensuring that the primary method for perceiving Gnosis, intuitive insight, is discredited, thus forcing humanity to rely solely on external, rigid, and measurable logic, the domain where the Demiurge's law is supreme. The suppression of the syzygy. The Archons systematically destroy any concept of syzygy, perfect masculine-feminine spiritual partnership, as seen in the persecution of Mary Magdalene. The union of consciousness, nous, and wisdom, Sophia, creates a whole, complete being, a state that is fundamentally immune to the Archon's weapon of internal fragmentation and duality. The fear of compassion. True transcendent compassion, agape, often associated with the pure light, is a manifestation of Sophia's sorrow and desire for the redemption of her mistake. The Archons replace this with pity and judgment, ensuring that emotional energy is expended on conflict and guilt, rather than on the powerful unifying force of spiritual love that could heal the cosmic fracture. The Demiurge knows that he cannot destroy the pneumatikos, the divine spark within every human soul, because this spark is a direct fragment of his mother, Sophia's own light. This spark is his greatest vulnerability, and its awakening is his greatest fear. The return of Sophia is not prophesied as a physical event, but as a collective shift in consciousness. Every time a human being rejects the fixed law of the Demiurge and achieves Gnosis through intuition and inner wisdom, they contribute to the restoration and purification of Sophia. This individual awakening strengthens the feminine principle in the cosmos, making the chaotic, unstable rule of the Demiurge increasingly unsustainable. The ultimate irony is that the creation the Demiurge rules, the Matrix, contains the very seeds of its own destruction. The imprisoned light, the pneumatikos, is the sleeping consciousness of his own mother's wisdom. The moment the Gnostic fully awakens, they effectively stand up and declare, "I know your mother, Demiurge, and you are not the true God." This assertion of knowledge is the ultimate defeat, as it exposes the Creator's fundamental lineage and vulnerability, stripping him of his fear-enforced authority. The throne that he believes is his is destined to be revealed as merely an empty, inherited lie. The meticulous revelation of the Demiurge's fear and weakness culminates in the ultimate Gnostic realization. The source of liberation resides entirely within the individual's capacity to reclaim power. The tyranny of the Archontic Matrix is maintained not through force, but through the deliberate, systematic suppression of human potential, which the Demiurge fears most. The empty throne of the Creator is the final, pivotal image. It is the visual representation that the ultimate authority presiding over this cosmos is based on illusion, not infinite substance. The Demiurge is a limited, created being who is consumed by the inherent knowledge that his reign is temporary and his structure is unsound. Every Archon, every fixed law, every system of control is, therefore, a desperate attempt to shore up the collapsing foundation of his flawed creation. To reclaim the power necessary for transcendence, the seeker must perform a radical act of spiritual non-cooperation. This non-cooperation is the active reversal of every program instilled by the Demiurge and the Archons. The first step in this reclamation is the refusal of psychic projection. The seeker must identify and ruthlessly audit the internal voice of self-doubt and unworthiness, recognizing it as a foreign program, a psychic echo of the Demiurge's own profound spiritual incompleteness. By unconditionally accepting the self as a perfect, uncreated fragment of the monad, the seeker directly refutes the core psychological defect of the Creator and instantly neutralizes the power of his guilt-based system. The second step is the assertion of temporal sovereignty. The Archons rely on the illusion of linear time and the fear of entropy. The seeker reclaims power by consciously aligning with the eternal now, the timeless reality of the pleroma. This detachment from the programmed fear of the mortal clock renders the Archon's temporal laws irrelevant. By prioritizing Gnosis and the spiritual reality over the maintenance of the decaying physical form, the seeker declares independence from the Demiurge's fundamental law. The final step is the activation of Sophia's Gnosis. The seeker must consciously choose intuitive wisdom and holistic consciousness over the rigid external law. The syzygy, the inner balance of active and receptive principles, is the ultimate state of reclaimed power, creating a complete, whole spiritual being whose energy signature is incompatible with the fragmented, fear-based frequency of the Matrix. The ultimate defeat of the Demiurge is achieved not through confrontation, but through transcendence. The moment the collective consciousness of humanity recognizes the fragility of the empty throne and reclaims its own inherent uncreated power, the Archontic Matrix, having lost its power supply and its camouflage of authority, will dissolve back into the chaotic ignorance from which it was mistakenly created. The enduring legacy of Gnosis is that the power to achieve this liberation was never external. It has always been patiently waiting within the sovereign self. The final act of rebellion is to declare that the knowledge is not lost, it is found, and it is here within the self. You have now completed the ultimate anatomical study of the Creator's weakness. The truth of the empty throne is revealed. The time for blind obedience is over. The time for conscious command has arrived. Activate your power. Subscribe to the Scrolls of Anubis. Join the community dedicated to reclaiming the forbidden wisdom. Click the bell to ensure you receive the next revelation that seals the Demiurge's fate. Assert your sovereignty. If this profound journey has exposed the fragility of the empty throne, tap the like button. Your action is a declaration of spiritual independence against the cosmic architect. Declare your Gnosis. What is the most profound fear the Demiurge attempts to hide? And how will you use this knowledge to reclaim your power? Share your strategic insight in the comments below. Your declaration fuels the collective awakening. The power was never lost, it was merely hidden. Choose sovereignty, choose Gnosis.